It was Thursday in the US, Thanksgiving Day, just hoping to enjoy turkey and just chill out without any tennis news whatsoever. And then tennis news dropped. And it was a big one as tennis stories go, because I think for me, the gauge of if a tennis story is big or not is if, my friends who barely watch any tennis other than the US Open for 5 minutes were contacting me about it. And I was like, okay, great. So this is what's happening. But if you did not hear, if you were living under a rock, or if you decided to put your phone away during Thanksgiving, which you should, Iga Świątek was, I don't even know how you say this, but basically she has been embroiled in a doping case. She tested positive for a banned substance sometime during Cincinnati, but she has been cleared of any charges because it was it was found that the contaminant that she tested positive for came from a prescription drug she was taking, and it was a contaminated drug. By the way, it was melatonin, which I learned through this process is like you have to have a prescription for it if you live in Poland. While I don't know about you, Nick, how it works in the UK, but I could just go down to the pharmacy and pick up some melatonin.
I've never, I mean, I may have had a melatonin before. I think you can get it relatively easily here. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a pharmacist yesterday, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I know what that is." So it's one of those things. Like, it's it's obviously not, and the substance that she consumed is not normally included in that. So
no, it's not.
They had to do some extensive investigating by the sound of it to
they
really
had to
track down what happened.
They had to do a lot of investigation. And for me, the whole part of the doping case is not the important part to me, because it's already done, in my opinion. It was investigated. She was found not guilty. And this was basically the announcement of the investigation and the whole process and
very
how
clear,
everything happened.
Not guilty of deliberate wrongdoing.
Of course, yes.
Deliberate
not
cheating did not take place.
Exactly.
It was still in her body. It wasn't a false positive. It was put there by accident. And she has, as a result, lost points from Cincinnati, because that's where the positive took place. And she was banned from competing during the Asian swing. So I think that's something important to clarify, is that what she's been cleared of is deliberate wrongdoing, which is why it was only like a month and she's going to be competing in 2025. This is not a Maria Sharapova situation from a few years back.
Right, exactly. And so, just like you said there, I think all the investigative work has been done, and there are documents galore from the testing bodies about the whole process. I believe it's like a 12-page document, which I'll link below in our episode description if you want to read it for yourself. But I think mostly what has not concerned me, because I'm sort of like, we live in a world and that's just what the world is, but
we live in a society.
We live in a society. Yes, we do. But it happened as well with the Sinner case. Was, I think what happens in these cases is, no matter the results of the case, even in the Simona Halep case as well, that we heard about last year or this year. Ooh, what's the year? Fans tend to take sides based on their fandom, not based on any fact, not based on any sort of written document, but they take sides based on their fandom, which I think is not the best way to be a fan in this sport. Taylor Fritz had a really, really great post on X, which I will also link below, where he kind of broke it down how he saw it as a professional player, where the discourse, or why all of a sudden people start, hating on a specific player or anything, has nothing to do with sort of the facts of the matter or the facts of the case, but have to do with, well, I am either a fan of Iga or I'm not a fan of Iga, or I'm a fan of Jannik or I'm not a fan of Jannik. And that's how you base your feelings on the case. And I always try and tell people what would happen if your favorite player was in the situation, you know, especially if they were cleared of choices and you heard someone else say something that was based on the fact that they're not a fan of your favorite player. I just don't feel that's the way to sort of address these very, very complicated issues. Now, and I'll let you jump in a second, Nick, but I feel like, are there questions to be had as to the way they handled these two situations? Because I know there's been a lot of discussion about like the privilege that top players have that is not available to other lower ranked players. It all comes down to resources and what these top players have that maybe a lower ranked player going through the same situation might not have. Mm-hmm. Should there be things put in place to help level the playing field, you know, like they say? Totally. But I don't think that's the reason for the uproar a lot of times. Because I think if we were going to have that discussion, completely get it. Like, we should totally have that discussion. A player who's 500 in the world should be treated the same way a player who's number one in the world. I think so anyway. So I think that's the conversation to have versus you're good, you're bad based on if I'm a fan of you or not. And I think we just need to have a little bit of a more chill, you know, discourse around things like this that are based more in the reality of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. That was what I observed when I opened my social media after hearing the news. I actually didn't hear the news from social media. I got a message about it. Actually, I didn't know what it was. I just seen the Iga news. I was like, what was it? And then I had to open a news app to find out what it was. And yeah, when I opened social media, that was very much everyone's knee-jerk reaction was based on whether they are a fan of Iga or not, or whether they actually dislike her already. Because let's face it, the accounts who were posting horrible things already didn't like her. Like, nobody's opinion of the player changed in either case. Maybe a little bit with Sinner, but not really with this. I think, once kind of that initial reaction died down, the conversation amongst on the online social media conversation amongst sort of maybe hardcore dedicated tennis fans has moved into discussions around the system and the process of how these incidents are investigated and dealt with. There does seem to be a disparity between how things work out with a top player and a lower ranked player. I think there is a lack of I think the two things that came out of this that people were upset about were a lack of transparency, for the fact that Iga had to basically lie about why she skipped Beijing and Wuhan. And that was because the investigation was confidential. And no one likes not having the full picture, being effectively told different reasons. The other thing to bear in mind is with this is the ranking situation. Yeah, I think everyone would want anyone of any ranking to have kind of to kind of be treated the same. It's complicated because no doping case is the same,
right?
Which is the other.
That was
problem.
Also a big thing. Yeah, they're not all the same.
No, it's not the same. It's different circumstances every time. It's different amounts every time. It's different explanations. And yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, if you think about a legal system, which effectively this is, but in sport, any defendant is entitled to due process.
Yeah.
Like you're entitled to a lawyer. If you don't have one, a court will provide one for you. That doesn't seem to exist with the ITIA. And when it's someone's career on the line, that's where things get a little bit muddy. And I think that so the Western style court system could be looked at as a way of moving forward. I think I'm happy enough with the circles that I move in. That's where the discussion has been moved to. I think for those of you who are maybe less into the sport, if you want to have this and get involved in these conversations, great. If you're not, if you just want to sit back and sort of, hey, I'm still getting into this, I still want to know who these players are when I get there. I think the only thing you need to take away from this is tennis is hot on doping of any kind, no matter how small. And if you are watching Iga Świątek or Jannik Sinner, you can be confident that they should be there and there's nothing untoward going on. As the majority, not all, but the vast majority of tennis fans feel when I've had discussions and I've sort of polled people on it.
Yeah. And I think just as a, going into a little bit of the existential, why does ground pass exist? And, we are definitely a resource for new fans. And I do talk, like literally at the Thanksgiving table this week, I talked to someone who was saying like, oh, your podcast is perfect for me because I literally watch only the Grand Slams, mostly the US. And it would be nice to be kept up to date with what's going on in between, like what tournaments are happening and things like that. And I just, with building that new fan base, I just want us to be a little bit responsible in the way that new fans come into the sport, and just hoping that we are encouraging fans to be a little bit more unbiased and just critical, with situations like this. No need for knee-jerk reactions or that's my fave or that's not my fave. I just think calmness is great. It's a sport. It's not the end of the world. And I think we have to just go with the facts of the matter versus what we think is going on. Because just think of if you were in that situation, you know what I mean? You would want someone to just look at the facts of the situation versus what you think.
And look, the two high profile cases that happened this year happened to players that we both really like.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's not and I don't know, I guess maybe people might think of that and be like, oh, well, you're only saying that because you like them. Which would be the other thing, which more power to you. If that's the way you feel, great, awesome. It is what it is. But I think I would say this with any other player. And if it turned out that they were at fault or anything like that, I would be like, okay, they're at fault. But then again, it's like, I think we need to just, I don't know, maybe it's something we'll talk about in the future, maybe long, long down the road. But I think fandom doesn't mean that, my world is over if Jannik Sinner's not playing tennis. You know what I mean? So I think that's a bigger conversation to have about just fandom in general, because I don't think it's just tennis. I think this is just something that happens in sports in general. But yeah, so wanted to bring that up. We'll leave all the links of articles below. I also watched a video this morning that Gil Gross put out. Gil Gross is sort of like a tennis analyst. He gets into the nitty gritty of matches that Nick and I do not get into as much on this podcast. But if you ever want to on this podcast, exactly. Oh, Nick goes on other podcasts and does the nitty gritty. But if you want to get into just the absolute backhands and forehands of it all, Gil Gross is really a great person to listen to. And I will leave his video below that he did on this matter, because I think it was really smart as well and really well said. Maybe said better than I could have, but yeah, definitely worth a listen.